For decades, a quiet Midwestern city lived under the weight of an unseen threat. From 1974 to 2005, Wichita, Kansas was gripped by a chilling series of events, each meticulously planned, executed, and controlled by a calculating individual who operated in the shadows. The person responsible wasn't impulsive, he was methodical. He left deliberate clues, contacted local media outlets, and engaged in an elaborate cat-and-mouse game with law enforcement that spanned 3 decades. His driving force wasn't guilt or remorse, but an undeniable hunger for recognition and public attention. He carefully constructed a persona built for infamy rather than anonymity. He craved the spotlight and media coverage that his actions generated. Ultimately, it was this very craving for recognition, not physical evidence, that would finally lead to his downfall. This is the complete story of how one person's obsession with fame unraveled everything. This is the story of BTK. Wichita was a quiet city of tree-lined streets and modest homes, where neighbors knew each other's names and front doors stayed unlocked. The kind of place where Sunday service was routine, children walked home from school alone, and violent crime was something that happened in other cities. That sense of safety ended on January 15, 1974. 2 schoolboys, Charlie Otero and his younger brother Danny, walked home expecting nothing more than the familiar warmth of family. But when they reached their house, something felt wrong. The front door was locked. Their dog barked frantically in the yard. The usual sounds of home were absent. Inside, they stumbled upon a scene that abruptly launched what would become one of the most profound cases in America's history. Police arrived at a scene unlike anything they'd encountered. The residents presented profoundly unsettling circumstances, meticulously arranged. Among these were the presence of Joseph and Julie Otero in separate areas, and their 2 children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine, whose conditions collectively deepened the mystery of the event. This was no random act. Evidence at the scene pointed to a carefully planned incident. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been taken. It soon became clear the Otero family had been specifically chosen. The methodical nature of what had occurred left investigators wondering, was this an isolated event or the beginning of something darker? 3 months later, Wichita had its answer. On April 4, 1974, siblings Catherine and Kevin Bright returned to Catherine's home around noon. As they entered, a man emerged from the back room holding a revolver. He was polite, almost apologetic. He claimed to be a fugitive who needed money and transportation. He promised not to hurt them if they cooperated. He forced them into separate rooms and restrained them. But when the attack began, Kevin fought back. The struggle was violent and chaotic, nothing like the controlled scene at the Otero home. The attacker fired shots at Kevin, who somehow survived. Injured and disoriented, he stumbled outside and flagged down help. Inside, 21-year-old Catherine Bright was found deceased. She didn't survive the encounter. The crime seemed different from the Otero case, more violent, less controlled. Police didn't immediately connect the cases, but they were beginning to sense a pattern. Someone in Wichita was hunting. By October 1974, both cases remained unsolved. Then something extraordinary happened. An anonymous call was placed to a local newspaper, the Wichita Eagle-Beacon. The caller spoke with an eerie, unsettling calm, offering chillingly precise instructions. Investigators were to locate a specific mechanical engineering textbook, hidden within the stacks of the Wichita Public Library. The call was strange, unnerving, and deliberately vague. Yet, its unusual nature prompted it to be taken seriously. When the police followed the instructions, they found the book exactly where the caller said it would be. Inside, tucked between the pages, lay a letter. The letter was addressed to the Secret Witness Program, which allowed individuals to send anonymous tips to the police through media intermediaries. Police quickly confirmed its authenticity. Detectives were stunned by the details. The letter described facts never released to the public. It left no doubt the writer had been there. But this wasn't just a confession, it was a manifesto. The writer criticized the media for ignoring the case. He mocked the police. He demanded recognition. He described his actions with precision and detachment, showing no remorse. He even described his method as having 3 phases: bind, torture, kill. a phrase that would later become a signature. For the first time, investigators understood they weren't just hunting a killer. They were dealing with someone who wanted an audience. The letter changed everything and nothing. Media coverage intensified, public fear grew, but no new leads emerged, and no suspect was identified. For nearly 3 years, Wichita wondered if the killer had moved on, been arrested elsewhere, or simply stopped. Some investigators believed the case had gone cold. Then, on March 17, 1977, he proved them wrong. On March 17, 1977, Shirley Vian was at home with her 3 children when he drove near her neighborhood in Wichita and parked near a grocery store on East Lincoln Street. After approaching a house and receiving no response at the door, he began walking around the surrounding area. During this time, he encountered a young boy named Steve, who was returning home from the store. They had a brief conversation, after which Steve continued walking home. He then watched as Steve entered a nearby house at 1311 South Hydraulic Avenue. A short time later, he followed and knocked on the door. When Steve and his brother Bud answered, he introduced himself as a detective and was allowed into the home. Moments later, their mother, Shirley Vian, came into the living room and found a stranger standing inside. Following the encounter, the scene was thoroughly investigated. Shirley Vian became a central focus of the subsequent investigation. The children were later found physically unharmed in a separate room, though, due to their young age, they could only provide vague details to the investigators. While authorities worked to piece together what had happened, another individual had already begun drawing the attention of the same perpetrator, Nancy Fox. He first noticed Nancy Fox as she entered her residence at 843 South Pershing Street, one half of a modest duplex where she had lived for about 2 years. He identified her name from her mailbox and later learned where she worked, eventually referring to her as Project Fox Hunt. Over the following weeks, he observed her routine from a distance. On the evening of December 8, 1977, he parked his vehicle several blocks away and approached the neighborhood on foot. Although the house was dark and he believed no one was home, he knocked on the front door to be sure. Knowing the neighboring unit was vacant, he circled to the back of the property and disabled the phone line. He entered through the rear window and remained inside until Nancy returned home. When she arrived, the encounter unfolded quickly and followed a pattern seen in earlier incidents, but this time, the perpetrator's behavior changed. The next morning, he placed a call to authorities and disclosed Nancy Fox's address, marking a new and unsettling shift in his approach. He was no longer hiding. He was announcing his presence. In February 1978, 2 months after Nancy Fox's death, a manila envelope arrived at Wichita's KAKE TV. Inside was a typed letter claiming responsibility for 7 murders: the 4 Oteros, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, and Nancy Fox. The letter included unpublished crime scene details, corrections to media reports, and a disturbing poem about Nancy. Most notably, he was suggesting names for himself, ultimately declaring, "The code name will be BTK. You will see it used. Bind, torture, kill." His identity wasn't assigned by law enforcement or the media. It was self-created. He began actively seeking public attention, driven by a need for recognition. He also spoke of a distorted internal force he called Factor X, which he claimed influenced his decisions and connected him to a broader, dark narrative he believed existed throughout history. Authorities believed BTK was watching KAKE TV. In response, police aired a subliminal message for a split second during the evening news. "Now call the chief," paired with an image of upside-down glasses found at the Fox crime scene. But the ploy failed. Within days, local newspapers began using the name BTK. It entered Wichita's vocabulary and settled into the city's psyche. Residents returning home in the evenings began routinely checking their phone lines, one of his signatures. People installed new locks, signed up for self-defense classes, and slept with lights on. A new task force was assembled. Profilers were brought in. For the first time, law enforcement officially acknowledged they were hunting a serial killer. In one instance, on April 28, 1979, he entered a home on South Pinecrest but found no one there. A few days later, the resident received a note and one of her scarves, suggesting she was fortunate not to have been home. And then, BTK vanished and would remain dormant for more than 7 years. He resurfaced in 1986. His next victim was 28-year-old Vicki Wedgerly, a wife, a mother. On the afternoon of September 16, 1986, her husband, Bill Wedgerly, returned home around midday and noticed someone else driving away in their car. Inside the house, he found something that made it instantly clear something was terribly wrong. Police initially treated it as a possible burglary. There was no message left behind, no clear indication of a known pattern. But subtle details raised concerns. Her driver's license was missing, and investigators noticed unsettling similarities to earlier incidents. Unknown to investigators, this was a calculated act, preceded by meticulous preparation. Access to the residence was gained through deception and without force. Afterward, evidence indicated the removal of a personal item. A fleeting thought to claim credit, through correspondence, was ultimately abandoned by him. For 17 years, this case remained unsolved, filed away as an unrelated incident. The killer's actions continued to go unnoticed. The ghost years continued, but what investigators couldn't grasp was that the perpetrator behind the crimes had never truly left Wichita, remaining a silent unknown. After Vicki Wedgerly's death, BTK entered his longest period of dormancy. For nearly 2 decades, there were no confirmed activities, no communications, no signs of his presence. During this time, investigators occasionally revisited the old cases. New technologies like DNA analysis offered hope, but without a suspect, there was nothing to compare evidence against. The BTK task force was officially disbanded, though some detectives never stopped thinking about the case. Meanwhile, life in Wichita moved forward. New residents arrived who had never heard of BTK. Children grew up without knowing the history that had once unsettled the city. Over time, the events shifted from current fear to a chapter in local history. But in 2004, something changed. Perhaps it was the approach of the 30th anniversary of the Otero case, or the realization that his crimes were fading from memory. Whatever the reason, the perpetrator decided to break his long silence. The question was no longer if he would return, but what form his renewed presence would take. March 2004. A package arrived at the Wichita Eagle. Inside were photocopies of materials connected to Vicki Wedgerly, along with a poem and other unsettling communications. After nearly 2 decades of silence, the sender had resurfaced. The return address listed on the letter was from a Bill Thomas Kilman, a name constructed to spell out BTK, and gave a location on South Old Manor. The address turned out to be a vacant lot. Investigators believed the name and location were deliberately chosen, though the exact meaning remained unclear. In the months that followed, more packages were discovered across Wichita, left in parks, taped to signs, even dropped off at local businesses. Each one contained symbolic elements, handwritten notes, peculiar figures, and allusions to earlier cases. One box featured a doll arranged in a symbolic manner, while another contained items believed to be linked to earlier investigations. In May 2004, KAKE TV also revealed another significant communication from BTK. A word puzzle filled with various terms and numerical sequences. Among the hidden phrases were words hinting at his methods and mindset, such as prowl and fantasies. Unbeknownst to police at the time, this puzzle contained 2 more clues, Rader and 6220, his name and his address. The city, which had long tried to move on, was pulled back into a story it hoped was over. Media coverage surged. Residents who had believed the past was behind them now realized someone had maintained an unseen presence all along. Sales of home alarms, locks, pepper spray, and personal defense gear soared. The materials made one thing clear. BTK had kept meticulous records. Items and notes tied to past events investigators thought were long behind them. As his letters increased, so did the wave of copycat messages. However, only a few people working the case were aware that BTK had designed a distinct signature. He stacked the letters B, T, and K vertically in a unique way. This detail was deliberately withheld from the public and became a crucial tool for investigators to separate genuine communications from potential copycats. This renewed activity, however, would lead to a crucial mistake. Among BTK's communications was a simple question that would end his decades of freedom. Can I communicate with a floppy disk without being traced back to a computer? Be honest. He gave clear instructions. If it was safe, respond via the classified section of the Wichita Eagle, under the name Rex. Police saw an opportunity. In the classified section of the Wichita Eagle, under the name Rex, they published their response. Rex, it will be okay. BTK believed them. On February 16, 2005, a package containing a purple Memorex floppy disk, along with personal items connected to earlier cases, arrived at a local TV station, along with personal items connected to earlier cases. Computer forensics analyzed the disk and recovered deleted metadata from a Microsoft Word document. The trail led investigators to Christ Lutheran Church, revealing the document's author, Dennis. Within hours, authorities identified Dennis Rader, church council president, city compliance officer, husband, and father of two. He lived in Park City, just outside Wichita, and had worked in municipal roles for years. From 1974 to 1988, he was employed at the Wichita office of ADT Security Services, installing alarm systems, ironically offering protection from the very threats later associated with the name BTK. To confirm their suspicions, investigators needed DNA, but Dennis Rader wasn't in any criminal database. Instead, they turned to his daughter, who was a student at Kansas State University. With a sealed warrant, investigators obtained a pap smear sample from her medical records. The results were conclusive. The DNA showed a familial match to evidence recovered from the Otero crime scene. On the afternoon of February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was pulled over while driving near his home in Park City and taken into custody. When an officer asked, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" he responded, "Oh, I have suspicions why." Following the arrest, a joint task force, including officers from the Wichita Police Department, Kansas Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and ATF, executed search warrants at multiple locations. From Rader's home and vehicle, they collected critical evidence. Additional searches were conducted at Christ Lutheran Church, where Rader served as president, his office, and the main branch of the Park City Library. At a press conference the next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams confirmed the breakthrough, stating, "The bottom line, BTK is arrested." Dennis Rader didn't just confess, he provided a detailed account of his actions. On June 27, 2005, in a Wichita courtroom, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 murders. His confession was delivered in a calm, almost detached tone as he recounted his actions. He described his methodical approach to each case, including surveilling neighborhoods as part of his planning process. He also shared a self-serving explanation, referring to an internal force he called Factor X, which he claimed influenced his behavior. Rader's crimes occurred between 1974 and 1991, claiming 10 lives. 2 victims, Maureen Hedge and Dolores Davis, had never been connected to BTK before his confession. Hedge was found in 1985. Davis disappeared in 1991. She was later located in a remote, secondary location. In the courtroom gallery, victims' families listened as Rader spoke of his crimes with disturbing detachment. On August 18, 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, without possibility of parole, 175 years in prison. Today, Dennis Rader remains in solitary confinement at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. He spends 23 hours a day alone in his cell, with no visitors and no audience. The man who craved recognition above all else now lives in anonymity. But even behind bars, investigations continue to reveal additional secrets. Recent searches of Rader's former properties have uncovered disturbing evidence, extensive disturbing materials and belongings hidden in locations scattered throughout Wichita. These discoveries suggest his criminal activity and related records were far more extensive than anyone realized. Even more troubling, investigators now believe the victim count may be higher than the 10 confirmed cases. His own journals have linked him to additional unsolved disappearances and incidents in various states. Authorities continue investigating whether the man who claimed to go dormant for years was actually more active than anyone suspected. BTK's capture brought closure to families who had waited decades for answers. It demonstrated how advancing technology, from DNA analysis to computer forensics, could solve even the coldest cases. But perhaps most importantly, it showed that justice, however delayed, can still be served. The name that once struck fear into an entire city is now just an entry in criminal history, a reminder that even the most cunning eventually make the mistake that brings them down. The quiet streets of Wichita are safe again. Dennis Rader will never walk among them. But investigators continue piecing together the full scope of his crimes, ensuring that every victim, known and unknown, receives the justice they deserve. If you like this video, please subscribe. From chilling mysteries to billion-dollar frauds, we cover fact-driven stories that shook the world. Your support helps us uncover more truths. See you in the next video.